Hey, what's up? Jordan here from hardcoremusicstudio.com. Wanted to do a quick video here on how to mix piano for rock music or kind of heavier music. Basically just dense arrangements with lots of guitars and drums and bass and everything, and how to get your piano to be consistent and present in the mix without getting buried behind all that stuff. So let me just show you the track I'm working on here. So the piano in this song is a really important piece of the arrangement, and it's almost taking the place of the rhythm guitars in terms of what it's supposed to be doing in the song. So we want to make sure it stays solid and consistent and steady, and that you can hear it throughout the whole mix. So let me show you the raw piano track that I got. So not bad, but maybe a little bit boring, and maybe some busier sections, and especially behind those guitar leads, it's going to get buried a little bit. So let's start working on it. First thing I had in the chain is the SSL channel for EQ. And one big tip, by the way, is to EQ in mono. So when I was doing the EQ for this piano, I had pressed the mono button on my monitor controller and was making sure that when everything was collapsed at just one channel coming out the same spot, that I could find the frequencies and do enough boosting and cutting and whatever I needed to do in order to get the piano to poke through the mix. So I've got a high pass filter at 100 hertz here. I'm also taking out a little bit of low end with the shelf around 120, just a couple dB or a dB and a half. I'm also cutting a little bit in the low mids around 250 with a narrower bandwidth here, and again only about a dB there. And then I'm also boosting the mid-range around 1.5K, about 4 dB boost there, and then adding a lot of brightness with the top end shelf, about 6.5K, doing 6 dB there. So let's check out an A/B of this. Obviously a lot brighter, a lot more mid-rangey, less of the low-end wooliness in the piano that we don't want in the context of a whole mix like this, because we got a lot of that kind of low-end energy coming from the bass and from the rhythm guitars, electric and acoustic in here. So we really want to focus on getting the mid-range and the high end of the piano to come through. Now let's hear it in the context of the mix. Hear how in solo it almost sounded a little bit odd, like kind of too mid-rangey and bright, but in the context of the mix, it really lifts the energy and the feel of the song. So let's keep going. Next, we've got a compressor, and you can't be shy when you're dealing with piano in the mix. Hopefully that's kind of the main point I want to get across in this video. I've got some pretty big EQ moves there, and then I'm going to do a lot of compression here, so let's check this out. Even though I'm doing, a lot of compression up to 10 dB or more here, it's fairly transparent still, but you can hear how it kind of adds a little bit of energy to the attack. It makes it sound like he's hitting it a little bit harder, and then also makes the overall level more consistent and just adds a little more energy in general to the mix and kind of just pins it down and keeps it in its place. Okay, after that, I found that it was just still needed a little bit more brightness, so I used this Pultec style EQ here, just adding about 2.5 dB of a high boost at 12K. This one's a little bit subtle. It's a really smooth, nice EQ, but it adds a little bit of air to the top end. And then lastly, what I usually really like to do with piano is add some saturation and almost some subtle distortion to the piano to help it cut through the mix and cut through the guitars. So in this case, I'm using the decapitator, a little bit of drive on the end mode here. Let's check this out. It's just giving us some more harmonic content, some saturation, and even like a tiny bit of distortion, and that's going to really help it cut through the mix again, like I said, and compete with the guitars. So let's go through our whole chain again. I'll bypass everything and then put it back in, and we'll see how this is sitting in the mix. Bring our guitar leads back. Main lesson I want to get across with this video is you got to be a little bit aggressive, or maybe a lot aggressive, depending on how heavy the mix is. You know, if I'm doing something that's more metal, more hardcore, or just heavier rock than this, I'll probably add more distortion, more compression, maybe even more EQ to get the piano to come through the mix, if you want it to be kind of a main element that is heard throughout the whole song. You know, when I was playing that whole section there with the plugins bypass, you could hear how it kind of sat back. It was kind of low energy. It was more just in the background of the mix. But once I put that EQ, compression, and saturation and distortion on, it really became a main element and a main driver of the mix. So don't be shy with your piano. As I always say, you know, don't be afraid to push your mix a little bit. You know, be aggressive with your EQ and compression for something like this. And if you go too far, then just pull it back a bit and find the sweet spot. And this is also another case for doing your EQ and everything with the whole mix running. You know, don't just EQ and compress while you have the piano soloed, because as you can hear in solo, this sounds a little bit too mid-rangey, too bright, too aggressive on the compression and all that, but in the context of the mix, it just sits perfectly. So that's it for this video. Make sure you're on my mailing list if you're not already. It's at hardcoremusicstudio.com. You can grab a cheat sheet, get on my mailing list. That's where I send all my best content. You'll get a bunch of free stuff there, and hope you learned something. I'll see you next time.